So Kevin Max from one of my favorite Christian bands, DC Talk, this week tweeted out, "Hi, I'm Kevin Max. I am an Exvangelical." If you're not familiar with that term, basically it's an evangelical Christian that leaves the faith. Normally they become atheists, but someone had commented on his post about him leaving Jesus, and he said, "You didn't hear what I said. I said I'm an ex-evangelical. I still love the universal Christ." Which all of us Catholics would say, well, then why don't you join the universal church that the universal Christ established? But I don't think that's where he's at. Even though one of their greatest hits, DC Talk's greatest hits, Jesus Freak, if you watch the video, there's a lot of Catholic imagery. And I don't think that's where he's heading. I'll tell you where I think he's headed and why in a moment. But I would like to invite Kevin Max, if he's watching or if someone knows him, to watch my video on Saturday, Lord willing. I say Lord willing because I just wing these things, but I'm planning on a video called Evangelical Unbiblical Traditions. I was an evangelical for 30 years, and there was a lot of traditions that I thought were biblical. And the deeper I got into scripture, the more I understood proper exegesis, the more I understood hermeneutics. I realized that these were unbiblical traditions. And so I went deep into church history and found where these beliefs came from. And they all come from a single man. But most evangelicals will swear they're biblical. So you definitely want to subscribe if you haven't already subscribed, and hit the bell so you don't miss that one. It's going to be, Lord willing, this Saturday, Unbiblical Evangelical Traditions. And before I forget, I also want to tell you guys, please, if you're buying or selling real estate, go to realestateforlife.org and make sure your commission isn't going to a woke company that's giving money to Marxist groups and pro-abortion groups. Your money's going to go to companies that are pro-life, pro-American, pro-Christian, and they're going to hook you up with a professional realtor that's been in the business many years. So go to realestateforlife.org. Now, getting back to Kevin Max and his statement that he's an ex-evangelical, he's saying he's not leaving the Lord. He's deconstructing and reconstructing. So these are terms, a lot of these evangelicals, they leave the faith and they say they're deconstructing. They're deconstructing their religious beliefs. And most of them become atheists. I've did several videos, and I could probably do a video a day if I wanted to, but I picked this guy because I actually like the band a lot, and their music really inspired me many years. But so he's basically saying that he's not leaving the Lord, but he's leaving the church. And if you look at some of the lyrics of his songs, he's got one line that says, "I love Jesus, but I love you, Jesus, but your people freak me out." Which, hey, you know, we all become Christians because we know we're imperfect. And, you know, I always joke that I would have became a Christian a lot sooner if it wasn't for Christians, you know. So there's some truth to that Christians could really kind of mess up your view of Christ, you know, because we're supposed to be little Christ. We're supposed to be representatives of Christ, and, you know, we're all imperfect. So if he was, you know, in a bad church or something, he could have had a bad experience. But I think it's more than that, because he goes on in one of his songs talking about, or, you know, basically I'm paraphrasing, but basically don't judge me because I don't believe in the inerrancy of man anymore, or things written down on paper. So, you know, the evangelicals, their whole faith is the Bible alone. So he's starting to question the Bible, apparently, that it was inspired by God, that these were just things written by men. And what I think is going on is 90% of these evangelicals leave over the homosexuality issue, that the Bible is clear, that homosexual practices are a sin. And if you believe the Bible alone, then you have to believe that. And a lot of them, can't accept that anymore as they get older. And, amazingly, I remember reading a book by Peter Crift. I think it was Fundamentals of the Faith, when I was first coming back to the Catholic Church like 6 years ago. And he said eventually all Protestant churches will become liberal, because if you don't believe there's an infallible church that gave us the infallible Bible, then eventually you're not going to believe the Bible is infallible. And I found that hard to believe, but the more I study the churches, you just see all these denominations becoming very liberal. I mean, the Lutheran Church, the first Protestant church, just ordained their first transgender bishop. So a lot of some evangelicals are just trying to change, like obviously the Lutherans are trying to interpret the Bible in their own view, how they want it to read. But then you have honest evangelicals like Kevin Max that are like, well, the Bible says this, I can't accept it, so I'm going to become an ex-evangelical. I can see more and more of this happening. I remember in the 90s, before I moved down here, I worked with these guys that went to a really good charismatic church in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and the pastor's son was like the worship leader, really talented guy. I mean, he cut an album, and he went out to Nashville and cut an album, and I didn't realize, I found out at the time, like, the Christian music industry is huge. People are making a lot of money, and their headquarters are in Nashville, so they're like with all these country stars. And you don't think of these country stars like sex, drug, and rock and roll, like the rock and rollers, but these are rich people, a lot of temptation. There is a lot of partying. I mean, these country stars are rock stars nowadays, and there's a lot going on there, a lot of temptation, and these Christian artists are right there. And this guy, he came from church in Jersey and went down there to cut an album, and he was amazed at how these Christian rockers acted. He was like, man, I couldn't tell the difference between the Christian artists and the secular artists at sometimes. So I think a lot of them, the temptation gets them, but then a lot of them meet a lot of homosexual artists, and they're like, wow, how could this guy be going to hell just because he's homosexual? God is love. So I think that they come to reject the scriptures because they get to know a lot of gay people. Now, I'm probably the last Catholic YouTuber defending Pope Francis, but I just got to say Pope Francis, I think, gets it right on the homosexual issue. I mean, a lot of people thought, he was too liberal and he was pro-gay because he actually lived what evangelicals say all the time about sin: hate the sin and love the sinner. I mean, he loved homosexuals so much, the way Christ loves them and the way the church is called to love them, that people mistaken that he accepts their lifestyle. I knew early on, years ago, I read an article that he was talking to bishops in Rome and said, we cannot let homosexuals sneak into the seminary. If you see a hint of femininity, don't let them in. I mean, that was more conservative than, the two previous popes' stance on homosexuals, coming into priesthood. It used to be, as long as this guy's taking a vow of celibacy and you think that, he's going to stay celibate, let him in, as long as he's renounced that lifestyle of sin. And Pope Francis saying, no. Even if he says that, if you see a hint of femininity, don't let him in. And that's why I wasn't surprised that recently the Pope approve the Vatican statement saying they can't bless gay marriage because they can't bless sin. So, I mean, the church doesn't teach if you're homosexual, it's an inherent sin. They say if you're homosexual, you're inherently disordered. There's something wrong. But if you act on it, and homosexual acts are sinful, according to the church for 2,000 years and according to the Bible. But there's many homosexuals that God has either given the strength to be celibate, and some I've met personally that have changed and they're straight, you know. I'm sure this is going to be controversial, but I've met them, you know, Catholic and Protestant, that are Christians with families now. So, you know, husband to a woman and children. So God can do anything, you know, God can change people's lives if they're willing to submit to his will. But I think, like I said, a lot of these evangelicals are seeing how empty evangelicalism is. I mean, evangelicalism has only been around for 200 years. What they need to do is look to the universal church that Christ started 2,000 years ago, and they'll find the fulfillment they're looking for. And I would just say to Kevin Max, you know, your statement, I love Jesus, but his people freak me out. Welcome to the club, brother. But you know what's so cool about the Catholic Church? We go there for Jesus. We go there for the Eucharist. He said, if you eat my flesh and drink my blood, I will abide in you, and you will abide in me. So we go to Mass every Sunday for Jesus. And if you don't want to talk to anybody, you don't have to. It's cool. You just walk in and out, boom. But if you do want to be involved in, you know, the church and evangelization, there's stuff available, you know. But there's not going to be people like in an evangelical church just swarming you, and you're going to feel guilty not being a part of their little clique, which always starts out wonderful, but eventually somebody gets hurt and burnt because they're human, you know. People are human. So, Kevin Max, I invite you to watch my video this weekend on biblical traditions in the evangelical church, because you're searching for the truth, and the truth is right before your eyes. The universal Christ wants you to come home to the universal church that he started. Everything else is man-made, and it's gonna fail. God bless. Stay Catholic.